After Queen Elizabeth's death, the palace thought her secrets were buried forever until a hidden vault surfaced. No one expected what was inside. Not gold, not royal artifacts, just a single letter, sealed by the Queen herself. Whispers started. Why was this kept from Charles? Why now? And then, the first line was read. One truth, hidden for decades, threatened to unravel everything. But to understand what was in that letter, we first need to understand what happened in her final year. In the final year of her life, Queen Elizabeth grew quieter, but never weaker. Her physical strength may have waned, but her mind remained razor-sharp, alert, and watchful. The world saw fewer public appearances, fewer speeches, fewer waves from palace balconies, but inside the castle walls, something far more intense was unfolding. Elizabeth had ruled for over 7 decades. She had endured wars, scandals, family betrayals, and national crises. But now, with time closing in, she seemed more reflective, more deliberate. She didn't just want to be remembered as a queen who endured. She wanted to ensure the monarchy survived beyond her. Those closest to her, her personal advisors, long-serving staff, and family, began to notice a change. Conversations once short and ceremonial turned deeper, often drifting into personal fears and philosophical doubts. She asked difficult questions, not about herself, but about the crown, about its place in a world that was no longer governed by tradition, but by change. She was no longer speaking in certainties. She was wondering, aloud, could the monarchy truly connect with the new generation? Was duty enough in a world demanding empathy, transparency, and relevance? These weren't the words of a queen content with legacy. They were the quiet fears of a monarch who saw storms on the horizon. Her closest friends noticed it too. In private, she would mutter that times have changed and that the monarchy must evolve or be left behind. She spoke often about the growing divide between the institution and the people it was meant to serve. These weren't mere thoughts. They were warnings, and they weren't directed at strangers. They were directed at those waiting in line for the throne. During this period, Elizabeth turned inward. She withdrew into her private chambers for longer stretches. There, she spent hours reviewing state journals, personal diaries, old letters from family, and photos no one else had seen in years. She wasn't just reminiscing, she was revisiting her reign, examining her past decisions, and quietly preparing something new. In her solitude, she began to write not to the public, but to history. Notes filled with regret, concern, and clarity. But among those papers was one document unlike the rest. A sealed letter. Untouched. Unspoken of. Hidden away from the public eye, and perhaps even her family. It wasn't part of a memoir. It wasn't written for tribute. It was something far more deliberate. A private message. One final thought the Queen wanted preserved, but kept out of the hands of those who might fear what it said. These weren't just sentimental reflections, they were preparing for something far more serious. It started as whispers, untraceable, fleeting, but persistent. Behind the stone walls of the palace, staff began to overhear fragments of conversations that didn't sound like royal ceremony or state affairs. They were deeper, quieter, filled with hesitation. Queen Elizabeth, a woman known for her composed silence, was suddenly asking questions that no monarch had dared to speak aloud. There was a tone of doubt in her voice, a kind of weary caution that betrayed her otherwise unwavering poise. Staff described late-night discussions with Princess Anne, hushed exchanges with her chaplain, and moments of long, contemplative silence after each visit. It was as if she were weighing something far heavier than succession, something personal, something she feared history might get wrong if she left it untouched. The Queen's concern wasn't about tradition. It was about trust. She reportedly told one aide that the crown must evolve faster than the world changes or it won't survive. These weren't theoretical musings. She was speaking from a place of urgency. For the first time, she admitted what many had feared. The public's connection to the monarchy was wearing thin, especially with the younger generation. In one exchange, She questioned whether titles and protocols still held meaning. "What is tradition?" she allegedly asked, "if it no longer speaks to the people it was built for?" It wasn't rebellion, it was foresight, and she knew the cost of staying silent. Some close aides noticed that she had begun seeking Anne's counsel more frequently than Charles's. Their conversations often stretched late into the evening, sometimes behind locked doors. While Charles prepared for his future role as king through public duty, Elizabeth seemed to be navigating a far different path in private one, where her instincts pulled her toward a vision of leadership that wasn't just about bloodlines, but about resonance. She often remarked that the next monarch should not only uphold tradition, but understand the heart of the people. That they should be able to walk among them, not above them. And although she never named names, her tone revealed more than words ever could. But the palace isn't built for speculation. It's built on control. And as her words began to echo across corridors, so did concern. Some feared her uncertainty could lead to internal rifts. Others feared what would happen if these thoughts ever reached the press. So silence became a mandate. Meetings became more selective. Discussions more coded. Those who asked questions were quickly reminded that loyalty meant discretion. And yet, the truth she was hiding had already begun slipping through the cracks. Because what the eager queen hadn't realized was that in the palace, secrets rarely stay buried for long. As whispers grew within the palace, so did secrecy. And soon, some were tasked with silencing it. When Queen Elizabeth passed, the palace moved swiftly into protocol. Public displays of mourning, national remembrance events, and tightly controlled media coverage gave the impression of order. But behind the velvet curtains, chaos was quietly unfolding. In a discreet chamber within Windsor Castle, the Queen's personal estate was being reviewed not just for ceremonial inheritance, but for sensitive documents and personal effects that had never seen the light of day. A select group of top aides, handpicked by the Queen herself before her death, were granted access to her most intimate belongings. But among the jewelry, handwritten notes, and private correspondences was one item that immediately stopped everything: a red leather case, untouched and sealed, with a single instruction etched into its clasp: to be opened by the sovereign. The gravity of that label wasn't lost on anyone in the room. It was clear this wasn't just a symbolic keepsake. This was intentional, purposeful, a message meant for one person alone, the next ruler of Britain. But this case wouldn't be opened alone. Only 3 were permitted to witness what it held: King Charles, the royal notary, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Together, they entered a locked chamber beneath the castle, far from the eyes of the media, far from the reach of even the senior royals. What unfolded inside remains tightly guarded to this day. But those closest to the moment said the air shifted. The silence grew heavier. When the case was opened, it wasn't riches or relics that emerged, but a letter, handwritten by the Queen, clear, precise, and according to those who saw it, absolutely devastating. No public statement followed, not even a whisper. The letter was never mentioned in speeches or briefings, but staff noticed something different. Charles, usually composed and stoic, appeared deeply rattled in the hours following the review. One aide described him as pale and shaken, barely able to hold conversation. Another noted that he left the chamber without a word, his hands trembling slightly. Whatever the Queen had written, it had changed something, and it had done so with the weight only a mother's final truth could carry. Behind closed doors, a legal storm began to brew. Royal legal advisors were called in immediately, not just to assess the document's authenticity, but its consequences. Could it be made public? Should it? Did it carry legal force, or merely symbolic weight? Opinions clashed. Some argued it would destroy the monarchy's stability if released. Others believed it would be far worse to bury it, only for it to surface, later under scandalous circumstances. The debate raged for days, but ultimately, a decision was made. Silence. At least, that was the plan. Because while Charles and his advisors debated, one voice from the Queen's past returned to complicate things. For over 4 decades, she moved silently through the halls of the palace. Not a royal, not an advisor, not even a name the public would ever know. But she was there for every royal birth, for every crisis, every celebration, every silent goodbye. A housekeeper, yes, but more than that, a witness to history. She had served Queen Elizabeth with unwavering loyalty, rising before the sun and retiring long after the corridors had emptied. She never spoke out, never revealed what she saw. Until now. Because what she knew was no longer a quiet memory, it had become a fire she could no longer keep to herself. In the days following the Queen's death, as the world mourned and the royal estate was carefully catalogued, she made a choice, one she had kept buried since Elizabeth's final days. She came forward nervously, quietly to a trusted contact within the Windsor inner circle. She claimed that before the Queen's passing, she had been asked to help secure several personal belongings in the palace archives. Among them, she recalled something strange, 2 letters. Not one, as everyone believed. 2, both handwritten, both sealed, but each bearing different instructions. One was to be opened by the sovereign. The other was labeled, "For the future." She remembered Elizabeth's words clearly, though they were spoken softly. "This one isn't for now. It's for when they're ready." The housekeeper had no idea what it meant at the time. But as events unfolded, the secret vault, the red leather case, Charles's shaken demeanor, she realized exactly what she had been part of. And with no one willing to speak the full truth, she took the next step. She reached out to a retired royal biographer, a man once trusted by the Queen herself. Someone who had been granted rare access to the monarch's thoughts and writings during her Jubilee years. He had stepped away from the limelight years ago, but when she told him what she knew, he came out of retirement with a single mission: to find the missing letter. The investigation began quietly, through private interviews and old records. But the moment word reached the palace, the reaction was swift and severe. According to sources close to the biographer, a legal notice arrived at his doorstep within days. A warning, a reminder that certain matters of the crown were not to be pursued. The threat was veiled in formal language, but the message was clear: stop now or face consequences. But it was already too late, because even as the palace moved to shut it down, pieces of the letter, its tone, its purpose, and its shocking truth had already begun to leak beyond the castle gates. The Queen's message, long hidden and meant for a different time, was finally finding its moment. The words she had hoped would guide the future were about to tear open the present. It didn't leak through tabloids or gossip columns. It wasn't whispered by palace aides or hinted at in ambiguous statements. No, when the letter surfaced, it came from an unexpected source, a respected royal historian known for his integrity, not sensationalism. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was pursuing truth. And what he published in an international magazine shook the monarchy to its core. The Queen's letter, long believed sealed or buried, was now in the public domain. Every word, handwritten and dated in Elizabeth's final months, now exposed a truth the palace had tried desperately to contain. In the letter, Queen Elizabeth didn't attack or accuse. She wrote with clarity, precision, and the unmistakable weight of a monarch who knew her words would outlive her. She began by expressing her deep admiration for William and Catherine, not just as royals, but as people. She described their unshakable kindness, humility, and connection with the public. She called them the future of a crown that must now serve, not reign. Then, without hesitation, she wrote the line that would ignite every media outlet, every political roundtable, and every royal household. The monarchy must belong to the people, and the people trust them. Not Charles. Them. But this wasn't a letter of rejection. It was one of mourning. Elizabeth spoke of her love for Charles, of his loyalty, of his years spent preparing to wear the crown. Yet she also confessed her deepest fear, that his reign would be one of repair, not renewal, that he would be seen as a bridge to the past, not a beacon for the future. Her words weren't cruel. They were honest. painfully honest. And then came the most controversial line of all: a king must not only be born, he must be chosen. With that sentence, centuries of royal tradition were pulled into question. The queen, bound for life by protocol, had used her final breath to suggest something unthinkable. That bloodline alone may no longer be enough. The letter wasn't legally binding. It didn't override centuries of constitutional law or royal succession. But it didn't need to. It carried something far more dangerous than legal authority. It carried moral weight. The words of a monarch who reigned longer than any in British history, now lingering in the public consciousness like a ghost that refused to rest. And once the people read it, there was no going back. Because it wasn't just a message to Charles or to William, it was a message to the entire kingdom. The public reaction was swift, loud, and divided like never before. The moment the letter went public, Buckingham Palace went silent. Not the dignified silence of royal protocol, but the kind that masks chaos behind closed doors. King Charles, already burdened with the impossible task of following a monarch who defined an era, now found himself at the center of a personal betrayal by his own mother. He reportedly called the leak a violation of sacred trust. Behind palace walls, the tension was palpable. Advisors scrambled to contain the narrative, but it was too late. The Queen's words were everywhere, and though they were written in love, they echoed with judgment. To Charles, it felt like a wound dressed in grace. Private meetings between Charles and William became strained, even volatile. Insiders say Charles confronted his son not as a father, but as a monarch questioning loyalty. William, known for his calm demeanor, didn't break. He didn't challenge the throne, didn't exploit the chaos, but he refused to disown the letter. When asked to publicly denounce its contents, William simply said, "It was her voice, not mine." That response was both diplomatic and defiant, and it only deepened the divide. Camilla, caught in the middle, felt the full weight of the Queen's omission. Though the letter never mentioned her by name, its silence spoke louder than any line could. She believed the Queen's favoring of William and Catherine was a direct rejection of the life she and Charles had built. Behind closed doors, she was, reportedly, devastated, convinced that her role as Queen Consort had been overshadowed, even erased by the ghost of Diana and now the voice of Elizabeth. The fracture in the royal family wasn't just between generations, it was between thrones and thrones in waiting. But not everyone sided with Charles. Princess Anne, long respected for her loyalty to the institution and her closeness to their mother, quietly offered her support to William. She was said to have told him, "She saw something in you the world is only just beginning to see." It wasn't an endorsement of rebellion, but it wasn't silence either. Within the palace, lines were being drawn in shadows. Outside, the country was splitting in two. Traditionalists clung fiercely to the established order, defending Charles as the rightful heir and viewing the letter as nothing more than a personal reflection, not a mandate. But a growing movement fueled by younger voices and modern-minded. Citizens began to rise, calling for a monarchy that mirrored their values. They didn't want spectacle. They wanted empathy, progress, and leadership that felt real. For the first time in generations, the public wasn't just watching the monarchy, they were questioning its direction. And in Parliament, things started, moving in an unexpected direction. The letter may have shaken the palace, but what followed was something no one in modern Britain had truly prepared for: a constitutional reckoning. Within hours of the letter's publication, legal analysts were called into studios, radio programs, and emergency political briefings. Every question pointed to the same chilling possibility. Could the monarchy actually change? The answer from constitutional experts was swift and clear. No. The line of succession, as defined by centuries of law and the 1701 Act of Settlement, is immovable by personal will, even by the monarch herself. Elizabeth's letter held no legal weight, but what it did carry was something far more dangerous: public momentum. Because laws are written on paper, but power lives in people's hearts. And the Queen's words struck deep. They weren't just about legacy, they were a challenge to tradition, a question hanging in the air. And across the country, it caught fire. Newspapers debated it. Newsrooms dissected every word. But it was Parliament that blinked first. A group of backbench MPs submitted a motion not to overthrow Charles, but to open an inquiry into public confidence in the monarchy. It was the kind of language designed to feel procedural, harmless. But beneath the surface, it carried the scent of revolt. Confidence. A word that implied it could be lost. Then came the petitions. First in hundreds, then in millions. Digital. Platforms flooded with calls to crown William and Catherine not as a rebellion against Charles, but as a path forward. They understand us, one viral post read. They represent who we are now. This wasn't a call for revolution. Tidulfi was a plea for relevance. And it wasn't just coming from the streets. Inside government halls, retired officials, once loyal to the crown, began whispering what had long been unthinkable, that a voluntary abdication might be the monarchy's only peaceful escape from the storm. Not a scandal, not a forced exile, but a graceful passing of the crown by choice. And while the world speculated, inside Buckingham Palace, the pressure was closing in. Advisors came and went with hurried steps and blank faces. Official briefings were delayed, then cancelled altogether. And behind those tall historic doors, King Charles sat with a decision no ruler wants to face. To fight for a throne he waited his entire life to inherit, or to listen to the echo of his mother's final words and walk away. Sources close to the palace said he spent more time alone than ever before, that he asked for old tapes of his mother's speeches, that he stared for hours at a single letter, the one she never meant for the world to see. Then, one quiet royal statement changed everything. There was no grand speech, no dramatic curtain fall, no royal declaration read before the world. Just a quiet statement, issued through the official channels of Buckingham Palace. In it, King Charles announced the formal delegation of duties to the Prince of Wales, effective immediately and lasting an undefined period. The phrasing was careful, calculated. It wasn't an abdication, but everyone knew what it meant. Behind the language of protocol, a shift had begun, one that echoed not just through the halls of power, but through the very legacy of Queen Elizabeth herself. The weight of the crown had not been removed, but it had undeniably changed hands. Prince William, now thrust forward without ceremony, began stepping into roles that once belonged solely to the reigning monarch. State visits, diplomatic briefings, private audiences with global leaders. At every turn, Catherine stood beside him not just as consort-in-waiting, but as a symbol of the modern monarchy the Queen had envisioned in her final days. The couple's presence was quiet but unmistakable, filling a space that had long been waiting for new life. And the public noticed, not with protest, but with a kind of emotional readiness, as if a burden they didn't know they carried had finally been lifted. Inside Windsor Castle, the Queen's final letter, now both infamous and revered, was carefully archived in a private vault, beside a portrait many had never seen before. It was of Elizabeth and William, taken during one of their last private moments together. A soft image, not staged or regal, but warm, personal, symbolic. Those who've seen it say it speaks louder than the letter itself, as if the Queen had been preparing us all along, not for a break in the chain, but for its evolution. And so, the monarchy began to change. Not with noise, not with resistance, but with quiet momentum. Charles didn't vanish from public life. He remained present, reflective and perhaps more respected for his restraint than he ever was for his reign. In a world that once demanded king's rule until death, Charles did something revolutionary. He stepped aside not because he had to, but because he knew when it was time. And in doing so, he honored not only the voice of the people, but the final whisper of the woman who wore the crown longer than anyone before him. Today, the monarchy stands on new ground, still ancient in tradition, but carried by hands that reach forward, not back. Elizabeth's vision wasn't about rebellion. It was about relevance. And while her letter didn't change the law, it changed something far more enduring: the future. Because while Charles wore the crown, Elizabeth's heart chose someone else. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.